And we're recording.
Open, close.
Open, yeah.
Okay. All right. My name is Garrison. I'm here today with the RealFood group of Panama City. And I'm going to be discussing permaculture and how that relates to health and the economy. So permaculture is a holistic ecological design science. It's primarily focused on design, as the greatest waste in systems can be attributed to the initial design. It accounts for animal structures, plant systems, energy, housing, water harvesting, and the likes. So one of the main focus in permaculture is water harvesting. Once you put your water harvesting system in place, that is 70% of your agriculture. That's according to Sepp Holzer, which is an Austrian permaculturist who was labeled as an agro-rebel when he was younger. He went against the government. He was taking risk on his own property. They told him he couldn't do it. He did it anyways. He succeeded, and now he's a multimillionaire that teaches across the world. So with that, also, in order to save the world, you do have to break the rules. And I say rules because laws can't be broken. All right, so I'm going to start with the water flow through geographic terrain. So these are mountains here. You have your primary peaks, you have secondary peaks. These drain into ridges and valleys. Now if you look at the inside of these peaks, if you go to a mountain, they create these little shapes right here. And in these little shapes, you have things called keyholes. This is where the land goes from concave to convex. Now, so this is what I'm describing as a keyline system and why you would need to know this. So a keyline system is typically where you connect ponds or key points in the landscape so that your water takes the longest route possible. One reason we want the water to take the longest route as possible, so we can slow the water, sink the water, and spread the water to provide for our trees. So a keyline system is basically is a succession of ridges and ponds that zigzag through your landscape. It's typically 100 feet of run for 1 foot of drop. P.A. Yeomans is the inventor of this. There's also a thing called a keyline plow. What they do now is they go on properties and on contour they dig little trenches that are made to harvest water. And this is for soil building and repair. So a lot of landscapes have been decimated. So a keyline system is the quickest way to get water into your system and start repairing. Alright, so let's go over a swale. If you look in Panama City, for example, and you get to the beach, you have a dune system. So in the dunes, it goes just like this. So the dunes go just like this, and it goes into the water too. These are your sandbars. So this pattern can be found everywhere in nature. This is where your sea oaks grow, your trees, and things of that nature. So this is a swale system, a natural swale system. It's already in place. Now if you look, you have condos that are built on a lot of these areas right here. So you have an unnatural 90 degree. I've seen a picture recently where you have water coming off the ocean, a morning sea breeze, and it would naturally fill in on the land and provide moisture
all the way back.
all the way back. However, with these condos, now the moisture comes up over here and then evaporates in the sky. So condos, most of the condos around town were all built, the major ones and the bigger ones were built during a peak inflationary trend, meaning there's a lot of artificial capital injected into the system. So a lot of your large-scale construction, especially recently, should have never been built. And that can be mapped and retraced. Okay, so one program that I was a part of was called the Accelerated Recovery Performance. It was basically how fast could you heal yourself. And not only how fast could you heal yourself, but it also made you perform your own recovery. So one of the things that the ARP system talks about is what causes injury. Injury is the inability to absorb force. Meaning, if you have too much workload on an area, it'll collapse under the ability to absorb force. So, the way that we create movement or heal is, one, to learn how to absorb force. You must first learn how to absorb force before you can create force. Basically, this teaches people to pull or contract. Because if you start pushing before you learn to contract, you'll injure yourself. Also, 3, accelerate. 4, endure. And this is the key to movement. And it applies across the board. And I could touch on this more, but basically, the inability to absorb force is what causes injury. Excessive workload causes systems to collapse. So there's such things as natural force and unnatural force. And I'll come back to that later. It'll all connect. So I'm going to mention some of the names in permaculture. Bill Mollison is accredited with being the father of permaculture, but what permaculture really is a return to indigenous wisdom. And I've heard of stories about when the settlers came over that they were following the natives through the forest system. And the natives were picking little branches here and there, twigs, moving stuff with their feet, and the settlers didn't know why they were doing it. But what was actually happening is that they were all trained to be master gardeners. So they learned this at a young age, and that's what they did. When the settlers came over, they decimated a lot of their systems. And so we're really just trying to remember how to do this. We've already been in touch with this knowledge. We've already been in touch with this wisdom. Really, we're just trying to remember. So permaculture is a lot about returning to indigenous wisdom. Now, Bill Mollison, he has a site in Australia called the Zaytuna Farm and the Permaculture Research Institute. His predecessor, or his main student, is a guy by the name of Jeff Lawton. Go to jefflawton.com, GEOFFLATON, to check out his videos. He talks a lot about how to do permaculture in a small urban landscape. He talks about buying property, and he goes through a checklist. And these things are very important. So I recommend you check out jefflawton.com. Now, he's also been ordained the Duke of Permaculture. There's a guy by the name of Paul Wheaton. He has the largest permaculture website in the world. And he labels himself as the bad boy of permaculture. He's not nice. He is he's downright mean, but he is enjoyable to watch and listen. And he likes to talk about hugelkultur a lot. Hugelkultur is essentially a bunch of covered logs and twigs and sticks covered with soil and straw and then planted with seed. What hugelkultur does is holds moisture in the soil and builds soil over time. It takes primarily 3 years before your hugelkultur system is the soil is producing max efficiency. But if you've got tree producing systems, that's okay if your tree is going to be 50, 60, 70, 80 years. So there are roughly 8 layers in a permaculture system. You start with the overstory. Okay. You start with the overstory. These are your largest trees. For example, those would be like your pines and your oaks here. Then you have an understory. These are your smaller trees. You have a bush layer. You have an herb layer. I'm skipping a layer. You have your roots layer, your vining layer. Yep, so we have bush, herb, roots, viners. You also have your fungi. But your fungi is primarily, the prime duty of the fungi is for decomposition, which is to create new space for new life to enter. So you have your fungi. What's the other one I'm forgetting? I've done this one before. Overstory, understory, bush, herb, roots, viners, fungi. Yeah, there's 8. I'm forgetting one. Anyways, there's another layer. In tropical systems, you have the palms. Palms are included in tropical systems. Mainly they're drought proof and they're also flood proof. So permaculture likes to focus on the earthworks. The earthworks is basically moving soil to create topographical relief on your property. It is very important to create topographical relief. By creating topographical relief, terrain, dimension, you've created microclimates in your property. By creating microclimates, we have the ability to have a larger array of diversity. If we have more diversity in our system, we have the ability to have more resilience. So it's less likely to collapse, which is huge. So in permaculture, the main work and hardest work comes first. And the most expensive. It costs the most time, money, and energy. Now there will be maintenance to your permaculture system, but it will get less and less over time. If you do it correctly, it will regenerate on its own. It will go to seed on its own. If you have fertile soil, a peach falls in fertile soil, peach pit grows. You don't have to plant more trees. Okay, so let's take example Rita's house, where we're at right now. Let's go over vectors. So a vector is an outside source coming into your property. So let's say this is north here. On Rita's property, on the north end, we have a noise and a privacy issue. Her fence is exposed, or her backyard's exposed. People can see right into her patio. When those people are coming in and out the door and yelling at each other, she hears every bit of it. So there's a noise and privacy concern coming from the north. We have to take all these things into account. From the northwest and the north is primarily where we're going to have our coldest winds. So we have to design for that too. Of course, from the south in the northern hemisphere, I think it's both hemispheres. I may be incorrect. Anyways, in the south, you're going to have your hottest, your hot temperatures, your hot winds, your solar exposure. On the south side of Rita's house and also on the east side, she gets a lot of traffic. And this is a crime vector. She has a possibility of people coming in. So we also have to design for a crime vector. Am I missing any other vectors on your property that we can think of?
The water coming in from the west and the neighbor.
Right, we have a flooding problem coming in on the west side. So we have to deal with that too.
West is on the other side.
North, you're right. West, okay. So anyways, vectors. Vectors are something to be considered. You have to design with vectors. Primarily, permaculture designs for catastrophe, flood and fire. So if you have designed your property correctly, you have created fire breaks. So you don't need to buy fire insurance. You've done that yourself. You've designed and moved the land and the water in a way where you're not going to have flooding. So you don't need flood insurance. One of the largest obstructions to permaculture, especially locally, is government organizations. This is not any news to very much people, but that doesn't mean the problem has gone away. If anything, it might have gotten a little worse. One of the main problems you're going to see is the zoning and planning board. For instance, if you did want to do any type of large-scale construction on any acreage, there I believe is a $5,000 permit fee. So how can this be accessible to poor people? And the answer is it can't. It can't. So that is a major problem. Also,
it varies from community to community.
True, true. Now, for instance, in Houston does not have zoning and planning boards, so you don't have to go through permits on where you want to build things. Now, the city itself is pretty spaced out, but it is an effective city that doesn't have zoning and planning. So those things can operate that way. All right, I'd like to talk on economics real quick. Again, this all connects. Inflation is the expansion of the money supply. Inflation is a form of legalized counterfeiting. It is also legalized theft. And so what inflation is essentially saying is that the society doesn't trust that young entrepreneurs have the ability to creatively solve problems that will come up. So inflation is one of the largest problems for permaculturists because it directs money that would normally go towards them to somewhere else. It diverts the money. Now if you do want to build a diversion ditch, you build that on 30 degrees. And you want water off as quickly as possible.
So if we got a diversion,
okay, so one of the main issues, in talking with Rita the other day, she asked me what are my priorities. And I actually, in terms of permaculture, and of course, she already has her property. So this wouldn't really relate to her as much, but I would say on the holistic side of the things, one of the biggest problems is access to land. A lot of young people are heavily educated as well as trained. They do not have the ability to get land. There are several ways that can be helped out. People can donate land. There's all different kinds of ways to, but one of the biggest problems is access to land, because in order for young people to get access to land, they have to go into debt. That's a debt trap. So permaculture is a solution to debt. It's not incurring more debt. The other one is water. Water is the main issue. 70%, I've said this already, of your agricultural system is water. When you have this done, you've got 70%. This is the most expensive, the most laborious, intensive, and will require the most maintenance in the beginning as well. So when we do create swells and hugelkultures and keyline systems such as that, primarily we dig them, we earth move, and then we plant nitrogen-fixing trees, which is legumes. And the reason we do that is because that builds soil. The three things that you want on your property is sunlight, or for your trees is you want sunlight, you want water, and you want air. Nitrogen is the main component in air. So soil. There are several ways to build soil. Obviously, as I've been speaking, keylining and swales are the best ways to do that. But but you can sheet mulch, you can cover crop outside. We've got sorghum, turnips, radish, legumes. Soil, water, soil, and then trees. So if you look at a forest, it is productive on all levels, from the canopy down to the root layer. It is packed full. And a lot of forests, no light actually reaches the ground. It uses all available space. If you look at modern agriculture, it does not do that at all. One of the biggest myths you'll find in agriculture is full sun. Full sun is a myth, and plants do not like full sun. Now, the one reason you would say, but I've planted tons of trees and plants in full sun, have they done great? Well, they're probably doing heavy watering, more likely, and more likely you got exposed soil. So we need to avoid that. So I'm losing my train of thought, but I'm coming back to it. So monoculture. What is a monoculture? If you look, a monoculture is a plant or a tree of the same species that has been planted in a vast array altogether. The pine forests are an example of a monoculture. And these have many, many harmful effects. But I don't have time to go into all that. I'm trying to cover a lot of stuff real quick. So I was talking about people to look up and people where to go. In town, there's a lot of good places where you can find good organic produce being developed. You can go to the market. There are people that are creating or that have organic produce. There's the olive places in town, Mount Olives and Olive Leaves. Those are great health stores. The Zen Garden is another good one. If you go to Seaside, Raw and Juicy is a good place. And if you go to Blue Mountain Beach, that place is called Just for the Health of It. I highly recommend that, all organic produce. So Panama City is probably a little bit behind on the times, but it can catch up very fast. And we have the ability to recover extremely fast. And that's why I bring up the accelerated recovery performance. Now, in the accelerated recovery performance, you would be healing. But as you are healing these large pockets of inflammation in your body, it would almost appear as new pains were coming up. As if you would be fixing one pain and you'd be like, oh, I got this new pain now. But actually what you were doing is getting to the source of your initial pain. So again, and that ties into inflation. So one of the largest source of pains that we have culturally is inflation. So anyways, permaculture is a synergistic system where plants grow and communicate together, and they grow in community. It covers temperature insurance. So sometimes we have frost, sometimes we don't have any frost. So we want to cover the extremes. Apples, peaches, possibly mangoes. I've never seen a mango. If someone sees it, document it for me. I'm tired of hearing all these trees that can grow here, but never seeing a single picture. So that is huge. We do need documentation. Now, in Crawfordville, Florida, there's a nursery called Just Fruits and Exotics. If you've never been there, I highly recommend you go. It's Northwest Florida's premier nursery. We don't have that here. That's a good investment to make. It's in high demand. So I've covered a little bit on economics, mainly inflation. I've covered a little bit on health, mainly in reference to the accelerated recovery forms. I've talked mostly about permaculture. And I was talking a lot about the people. And just, for example, the Bullock brothers in Oregon, these are 3 brothers. They are basically living in a completed permaculture system. They are just sitting back, reaping the rewards. Permaculture is basically a tangible social security. It's a tangible social security. If you invest in it, it is the best thing for your retirement. Inflation affects food first. So the inflation hits food more than anything. So first we have to absorb the force of government agencies. Once we correctly know where those vectors are coming in, then can we collectively move as an organization. Then we can create momentum. That is our goal. Once we get momentum started, can't be stopped. So absorb, create, accelerate, and then endure. And when we get tired, when we fail, when we fatigue, we stop. A lot of modern systems, people work 8 to 10 hours. People start making mistakes when they're fatigued. So permaculture is not about 40-hour work weeks. It's about 20, 25-hour work weeks. It's not about the quantity of your labor, it's the quality of your labor. It's also in your best interest to have permaculture because, one, permaculture is the ultimate fast food, or raw fruits and vegetables. You know, rather than driving to McDonald's, because it's fast, you can go outside and grab an orange. It's also the freshest because it's rich in nutrients. So living food is the healthiest. So let's see. All right, let's just take Rita's house for example. I don't want to talk too much longer. And I'm kind of all over the place, but I like that. So this isn't the exact shape of Rita's house, but this is just what we're going to do. So basically, Rita operates on about 1/8 of an acre, 1/4 of an acre, and 1/8 of it is arable land. The house takes up the other half. So we want to keep water on site. So we don't want water rushing off site, and we don't want the other neighbor's yard flooding us. So we want to contain our water while not being flooded by the neighbors. Now maybe in the future that would be a potential water source that we could tap into, but as of right now it's a flooding source. So we have designed a swale system, which is a water harvesting ditch on contour. Contour is equal elevational points. So we've just basically built a swale system around the house. We got a little unique yin-yang system that goes into the ditch, and it's not completed yet. But basically this swale system goes around and it provides water for the trees that we're going to plant. And some have already been planted. Now the cheapest place to store your water is in the ground. So our annuals are closer to the home, furthest distance. They also need the most attention. On the outside, this is a smaller property, but typically on the outside you surround your property with wilderness, which is a zone 5, they call in permaculture. And then you have your larger system and your trees on the outside and you work your way in. She has an herb spiral in her backyard, and this is very close to the house, and she's not going to plant all herbs in it, but it's close. If she needs to grab some mint or she wants to grab some basil, she can walk outside and grab it and throw it in her dish. So it's all about the distance in terms of space and time. Permaculture really is a strategy about stacking functions and the ability to recognize patterns. So pattern recognition is huge in permaculture. If you can recognize the pattern, you can predict it, and then you can either outsmart it or eat it. So we're all about pattern recognition. Anyways, so we have trees on the outside, and on this side we have a very windy swale system. Now, by having more curves in our property, we've created more edge. The more edge we have in our property, essentially the more space we have. So rather than having just a straight swale system on the side, by having curves, we've elongated the area. we've now increased the cubic volume that we can hold. So we can hold more water and we can feed our trees more nutrients over time. So this is Rita's house. She has a roof and of course feeds into a groin system. The groin comes out the gutter and comes out here, which we are going to feed into the swale. So this is permaculture in a nutshell. Locally, we can grow things, large trees like pecans, walnuts. You start moving into the understory. You got pears, grapefruits, limes, and of course, there's always borders between the two. An event is the border between differences. An event is a border between differences. Okay, so I'm going to start wrapping it up. Basically, you want your water to take the longest path as possible through the landscape. You want to hold it on site. Yeah. So just some more references for all of you out there that are listening. Spiral Ridge Permaculture in Tennessee is doing some excellent things on a family farm. The Bullock Brothers, of course, in Oregon. Toby Hemingway's book, Gaia's Garden, is great. Larry Santoyo of California is doing a great job. The Permaculture Research Institute in Australia is doing a great job. Okay. That's what I can think of right now. I didn't organize my information because I purposely wanted to be a somewhat state of anarchy. Kind of wanted to put myself on the spot here, and then from that I would work out of that. And so basically, wrapping up, we have to absorb government force primarily through inflation, as this is the largest injury to permaculturists and permaculture communities that are trying to develop. Once we do that, once we correctly contract all our resources, we can then create momentum. And we have to clearly visualize what it is we want to see, because you cannot move to something you cannot see. You can't move in a way that you cannot see. That is impossible. You must first imagine it. And then the last one is enduring. So you do have to endure and push it to failure, but we don't want collapse. We want to have resiliency in our system, so if failures do occur, the system won't collapse on its own. And that's why we have diversity in our system. That is the main purpose of diversity. So things we got to watch out for: monoculture. Monoculture, no bueno. Inflation, no bueno. Inflammation is not good for you. We don't want these three things. So I'm going to wrap up. Inflation, inflammation, and monoculture are all hurting us. And if we can overcome these things, we can then heal. We will feel new pains, or what we decipher as new pains, but really it's pain source that we didn't know. So we got to heal the big spots first, and then acute will come later. And that's it. All right.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. That's it.
Yeah. Questions?
Terry had a question.
I forgot what it was.